Okay, I didn't know if I'd speak before lunch or after lunch. So if I'm keeping you all from lunch, this could be a really bad thing, I guess. But anyway, we're gonna go forward nonetheless. Some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you today about is pertinent to Virginia. Some of it is from Georgia, and in all honesty, you probably are not going to see it. I hope you don't see it, but it may give you some things to think about. We are in a very different environment, and so things are going to be a little bit different. But I wanted to give you some things of interest that you might just find enjoyable. Eric's already mentioned this. I would encourage you to go to this site. Again, this is that www.smallfruits.org. All the stuff that I am not going to cover is in there. If you look at blueberries alone, I could probably speak to you for an hour and a half on blueberry diseases and management, and the same thing for blackberry. So don't want to, someday I may be invited for a 3 or 4 hour session up here, but I don't think you want that right now. And so I'm going to try to concentrate on just a few things, and specifically some of the research that we're conducting right now. But this is where you'll find all the different recommendations, the fungicides, insecticides, all that type of information that you can utilize for growing these commodities. I'm going to start out talking about one of the diseases that I know you would have in common with us, and I think you'll have it on pretty much any of the blueberries you grow here. In Georgia, we have this mummyberry disease as a problem predominantly on rabbit eye blueberries, and we don't see it on our southern highbush. But I know when you move into North Carolina, southern highbush has plenty of mummyberry, so I'm assuming you're going to be in the same boat. So probably any blueberry you're going to grow here is going to have some of this mummyberry. Now the problem can be this blasting phase, where you actually can wipe out like 90% of your berries immediately with bloom. And I'll go over the disease cycle in a minute. But we have seen, especially on organic blueberries, we've had tremendous losses because the materials that are utilized organically are not as effective as some of the chemicals, and we do have issues with that. But you can see that blasting phase of this disease. As far as the disease cycle, it's important to understand this, and I concentrate on this with growers every year, but this disease is predominantly a bloom disease. It's a very specific disease cycle. If you want to read about it in detail, Annemiek Childers from Michigan State has this website where you can pull down a document that describes this in detail. This is taken from that. But this, let's see if I can get my arrow to work without going forward. This little apothecia actually is the old mummy from the fruit, and it germinates in the spring about the time that bloom starts. Now you can have either green tip or bloom would initiate your sprays. And a lot of times people think that green tip's the only thing. Green tip is early leaf development. So I'm talking about something like the size of the lead on a pencil. If you're looking at the very tip of a pencil, when you have that much green tissue showing, about 10% of it coming out, you need to start spraying. Now, if your bloom goes ahead of green tip, if your blooms start to break open at all, you need to start spraying. So whichever occurs on whatever variety, you start spraying right then. And you're going to say, oh, I don't have anything out there hardly at all to spray. It doesn't matter. Start spraying. You're going to have this disease cycle starting, and you don't want to miss that. And that's where that blasting phase will come in. And then the initial blasting phase is one thing where it actually is killing out the blossoms and the blooms. But often you'll just get a slight leaf infection. Sometimes you hardly can find this. You'll see these leaves, you have to really search for them. But you'll get a few leaves here and there that are infected. But on these leaves, you'll get this, these secondary spores forming here. So the first spores are actually going in that early phase to the leaves or to the early blooms. But if you don't get a whole lot of that, you'll get these leaves to be infected, and then you'll produce these conidia. Now those are going to go directly into the blooms. And this is a very unique cycle because the bees can spread it and move it around. But you'll get these individual spores going to the bloom, and it'll go back down into the fruit, and you'll think your fruit is fine. You'll be looking at your fruit developing and you think everything's happy, but it's not. And so that's a different kind of a symptom that you're going to produce later. And that's when you start seeing these mummified fruit about mid-season. So everything looks good, and suddenly you have these mummified fruit and everything turns sour in a hurry. It looks like on paper that we have a lot of different fungicides that should be available for you to use for this disease. That looks good, but in reality, you don't have much that really works well. These are the materials that work well, and they fall in two different categories. You've got the DMIs, of which Indar and Orbit. There are now some others that have been added into that. Quash has been added as well, and some others. And so look at that site again to find all the different ones, but they're all DMI fungicides. So you treat them all the same, you use resistance management as if they're the same thing. And then you have Pristine. And Pristine has another couple of fungicides in there. And what I've generally recommended people to do is use Pristine for your first application, and then go to the DMI materials and use those plus Captan. And I always recommend that you put a Captan application out with the DMI. It's a good recommendation for resistance management. But some of the DMIs actually can increase rots if you use them by themselves as well. So always put Captan in with an Indar, an Orbit, Quash, those types of materials to expand the disease control, but all resistance management and to prevent rots as well. So that's what you have to work with during that bloom phase. And again, you're spraying during bloom. This is strictly a bloom disease. You spray during bloom every 7 days if you can, whatever the label will allow, and try to get in as often as you can. Usually it's about 4 applications at max. Sometimes it can go to 5 during bloom. It depends on how long the bloom is. But as long as you have flowers out there that are can be infected, you need to put something out for that. And it is a general disease, probably one of the major diseases we have. Now, if you were to cut open a green berry that has been infected, where this is beyond the blasting phase, but any of these infections that occurred, you can actually see this is the white mycelium. It kind of looks like these little angel wings there on one side. That's where the fungus is working its way in. And eventually that will mummify, will colonize and mummify that berry, and it'll fall off and you'll lose your fruit. As far as how to control it, okay, I've already talked to you about some of the things you can use. This is a study from a couple of years ago, and it just gives you some idea of how bad this can be as far as the amount of fruit that can be infected. In this particular year, we didn't have a lot of that blasting phase where we just had the obvious burn of all the leaves and blooms. We had this kind of more of a gentle type approach to the disease. We had a few leaves that were infected, and then we got the fruit infected, and the bushes and the fruit looked good until about mid-season, and then we actually took our data and we saw that a lot of these berries were infected. So we actually go in and cut the berries open and actually see how many of them have that little white mycelium that I just showed you a second ago. But if you look at these treatments, this is the untreated control. In this particular test, which just is a really hot test, we had 75% of the fruit were infected. Looked good, but we had 75% that were not going to go to market. If you put in Indar, which is the kind of the standard, Indar is a DMI fungicide. We got 20%, so very, very strong reduction. Here's Quilla Cell, another DMI, about the same, and here's Quash, very similar, another DMI. And all of these are giving pretty good management. You're still getting some disease, but that's good for that site. What I wanted to also point out to you is kind of ignore the rest of the table, but look at Regalia. Now, if you're growing organic, I know we've talked about organic blackberries here this morning, but Regalia did not do anything. And there are just so many products that are out there that are registered for organic and they're registered for blueberries, and they just really don't do anything. Same thing for blackberries. So be very skeptical, be very aware. Some of these products are going to have some activity, but overall they're not going to have a whole lot. If you look at Optiva, the one thing I'll say about that is actually a biological as well, and that's a bacteria. It's a Bacillus cellulose bacteria that is an organic product that can be applied to blueberries as well. And in this particular trial, I'm not really pointing that out very much, but it did have some impact. And so there are some materials that can be utilized. I would recommend Serenade during bloom if you're growing organically, but there's not a lot of them that are out there. We do now have an organic spray guide at that site, by the way, for blueberry though. So you can go to that site and you can see what we think is actually acceptable and what works. Here's another point. Okay, I mentioned to you that you're going to be spraying for that mummyberry when there's not very much out there. Not a whole lot of leaf tissue, not a whole lot of bloom tissue. So producers would think, oh, I can spray every other row or alternate row middle. This is just a representation of what that looks like. So you go in one time, spray every other row, and then go in a few days later and spray the other rows. So for example, here you'd spray like this, that pattern, and then go back and spray like that. And you'd think that's probably a good idea and that should work. And we looked at this last year just looking at some spray cards. And here we would be going and spraying in with an air blast sprayer this way and spraying this way and not spraying the middle. And you can see from those cards we're not getting good coverage. And we had seen producers getting a lot of mummyberry as a result of trying to utilize that early in the early sprays. And I would not recommend it. If you are doing this and you put out spray cards and you can prove to yourself that it works for you and your site early, then more power to you. But our response has been that we don't think it works. And so I'm advising producers, even though it looks like you're getting pretty good coverage with that, if you're just visually looking at the spray coming out, you're not getting the coverage you think you're getting. And so I'd be very careful about that. Here's another test we did last year. And just to give you a little bit more idea about that early blasting phase, I said the other test I showed you, we didn't have that. This is the, let's see if I can get this arrow, here it is. The untreated control here, this is the number of strikes that we had with that, very, very high. And here's your mummy incidence. Often if you have a lot of strike severity, you don't get enough fruit produced to even have the mummified fruit, so we went down on our mummified fruit. But that just gives you an idea what the untreated is. We looked at NDAR, which is one of those DMIs at 1/3 the labeled rate, and you can see that with a reduction in that labeled rate, we did not get the control we wanted out of that. That's what you would get if you're looking at a reduced coverage with an alternate row middle application. So that's another reason I'd tell you not to do that. Proline's a new DMI fungicide. You can see how well that Proline did for controlling this disease. Again, Proline was registered last year. It's another DMI fungicide and works really, really well. So you might want to consider that also for the mummyberry. Oops, let me go back. All right, nematodes. We had a lot of questions about this. We are predominantly seeing nematodes as a replant disease. If we go into a pine wood area and it's a new, what I call new ground, we don't see it as an issue. But when you have had blueberries in a site and you're going back into that same site with another cultivar or replanting because of disease, then you have a replant issue, and nematodes are part of that. And that's kind of what we're showing here. Let's see, where did I go backwards? All right, there are all kinds of nematodes. And as I said before, we've done surveys, and so we know some of our nematodes that are out there, but your nematodes may be different up here. So that's the different kinds of nematodes that can be found, and a lot of these can be found in association with blueberry. We do know that now. When I first came to Georgia, I was told that nematodes do not cause problems on blueberry. That's only been 15 years ago. And that was the common dogma that was out there, that nematodes are not a problem on blueberry. And the bottom line was that just was not accurate, and it had gotten its way into the literature back in the 50s and 60s, and nobody ever looked at it again. And the reality of the thing is, yes, they can cause problems. This is our survey data. Again, our major thing that we saw was this ring nematode, the Mesocricanema. We have a lot of it. In North Carolina, there are different nematodes that are prevalent. And I suspect if you came up here, you might have even different ones again. So it really takes surveys to know which ones are there, but I can almost guarantee you on a replant, you're going to have a buildup of nematodes. But this ring nematode is our problem, and it gets around the roots and you get a lot of them. We have really high counts of these nematodes around blueberry roots. And we have found that initially we were just looking at this from the standpoint of what happens when you fumigate. And with methyl bromide, we get a really nice growth response, and where we did not fumigate, we get death and decline of these blueberry plants over time in a replant. So that let us know that nematodes are important. Just very simple data. You fumigate, you get increase in yield, and you get a reduction in nematodes. So those go together very nicely. So fumigation and replant is important. And we see a lot more of our production areas now going in with fumigation. Sometimes white, sometimes black plastic on top, but nonetheless fumigated and sealed with plastic, and sometimes with bark underneath as well. But that's now kind of generally happening. We do know also from our work that the rabbit eye blueberries are less susceptible. I would still fumigate if I was going in a replant with rabbit eyes, but this is just a survey type work we did with some different varieties. And if you look at, here's a northern high bush blueberry legacy. These are all southern high bush blueberries. And then these are all rabbit eye blueberries. And if you look at the nematode populations we get out of these studies with these various types of blueberries, you can see that southern high bush and northern high bush are much more susceptible in our situation with that particular nematode. Also, Eric mentioned bark. We've started looking at different fumigants in combination with bark or without bark. And what you can see is without regard to the pre-plant fumigant you utilize, the nematodes are going to come back up in population. But when you combine fumigation with bark, that's a good practice. I love bark. I love pine bark. I think pine bark for blueberries is one of the best things you can possibly do. It's costly, but as far as the longevity of the blueberry plant and the total package you get out of it, it's a very good practice. So these are our conclusions from our nematode work. We now know that fumigation is a good recommendation on a replant. We do now know that nematodes are a problem, and so I would again suggest that's something that needs to be done in Virginia as well as looking at nematodes. Southern highbush and highbush blueberries in our case are more susceptible to nematode damage and replant damage, and then pine bark is one of the things we like to utilize. Now I'm going to talk to you about something you may not ever see up here. And this is a bacterial disease. And this is also a relatively new thing for us, but it's a bacterium called Xylella fastidiosa. And it basically clogs up the xylem or the conducting vessels in the plant. And it has been a major issue for us on certain southern highbush varieties. This is what it looks like. It causes these scorching symptoms on the leaf. You can see how these leaves start to scorch. Plants eventually die back. Here's another shot. One of the things that's kind of unique about it is the leaves eventually fall off. The plant otherwise may look pretty healthy. If you go to the root system or cut into the stem, you may not be able to see a whole lot that's wrong with the plant, but I can tell you that blueberry plants do not grow well or do well without leaves. And so that's a conclusion we have come to. We're pretty smart in Georgia, y'all can tell that. But anyway, this bacteria does get in, it clogs the xylem, and it will kill the plant. Now, where you may see this is in the warmer coastal areas, possibly. You might possibly get it, but so far North Carolina has not seen this disease, so I hope you don't see it. But it's one that's relatively new for us, and we've looked at it. There are these sharpshooters that spread this disease, that bacteria. Now on wine grapes, the same sharpshooters and very similar bacteria are a major problem. It's called Pierce's disease, and y'all do have that here in some parts of your state. So it wouldn't surprise me at some point if it doesn't get into the blueberries. We do know that there are varietal susceptibility differences in this. And again, I'm going to skip through some of these slides pretty quick so we can go to lunch. But just the bottom line is the southern highbush are susceptible to it, very susceptible. Rabbit eye varieties carry it. It probably has a long-term impact on them, but it does not cause major damage immediately. We did a survey back a few years ago, several different spots, and we found real major differences in the amount of this disease based on cultivar. So breeding is probably going to be one way out of this. Cultivars are very strongly influenced by it. Here's an example. This is one cultivar that we stole from Florida. It's a bootleg cultivar that's brought into Georgia, and it's called Florida 8619, and we called it V1. And then you look at it and it died. And you compare that to some of these other cultivars, and they live pretty well side by side with it. I've said this is one of those examples where your sins will find you out, because you steal varieties, something bad's going to happen to you. But anyhow, we do know that over time, some varieties, like Star is one that we grow, it's susceptible to it, but it's not nearly as susceptible as that V1. You can see that over about a 10-year period, you'll lose 75% of your plants. With Star, over a 10-year period, you're going to lose about 30% of your plants. Now, you're still going to lose a lot of plants, but you can probably survive that with some replanting, whereas with the V1, it's going to go away in a hurry. And again, just some more scorch symptoms in the greenhouse. There's been some work done to look at trying to screen for this. It is difficult to screen for because there's so many different strains of this bacterium that are out there. So that in and of itself makes it very difficult. So again, this is another new pathogen for us. It's relatively new. I've identified it about 10 years ago. It impacts predominantly the southern highbush varieties, of which you may be growing some of both. You can't prune this out, by the way. We've tried that. If you have a scorch symptom, you try to prune it out. By the time you prune it out, it's already in the root system. So we know that. This is another thing that we do realize can be propagated. Nobody would intentionally do that, but you could have a bush that looks good, that has the bacteria, and you could still propagate it and move it. And so that is a concern for us. There are a lot of vectors, but there are all these sharpshooter type vectors in Georgia that are spreading it. And we do know that there are varietal differences, and that we are looking at that as well as something that breeding can actually solve. All right, here's something else we have on blueberries in Georgia and also in North Carolina, and you may see this. I think this could possibly make its way north. But this is on southern highbush. Again, it's southern highbush varieties. I don't know if we get on highbush or not, but definitely on southern highbush. and it's blueberry necrotic rain blotch virus. This is a new virus, newly identified virus. The good news about it is it's not systemic. So it comes in 1 year, and the next year it may go out and you won't see it again. But it's spread by these little, or we think it is spread by these little mites. They're aryaphyid mites, possibly some other mites as well. And there's some aryaphyid mites that have been found in association with it. These are some flat mites that have been found in association with it as well. But again, so far all our research is in association type research. We've not been able to prove or done the research to say that they're definitely spreading it. But if you get this in, it'll cause this spot, and then eventually that spot will coalesce, and it's just like a leaf spot then. Often these are confused with leaf spots, but that's actually a viral symptom. And those spots become necrotic or dead, and eventually you'll defoliate your plant, which again is not good. This just shows how this can spread within a season. If you look at all these blocks, these 4 blocks, this is early in the season, and then by the end of the season, and as you go, the darker and darker the brown gets, the more disease you have in that bush. And so that's a pretty aggressive spread of an organism, and it is viral, but it actually is pretty devastating. I was out at y'all's farm here locally yesterday, and we did see some of this particular virus here, and I bet you've got some too here and there if you're growing blueberries. But this one is red ring spot virus, and it's not the same as this blueberry necrotic rain blotch virus. The blueberry necrotic rain blotch virus is not transmitted by propagation, so it's not a propagated virus. This one very much is. So this one is coming in from the nursery. If you get that virus in, it did come from somebody who took a cutting and had the virus in it. That's propagated. The good news about this virus, this red ring spot virus, even though you probably will see it, is it doesn't do a whole lot of damage most of the time. It's very rarely an issue, and it does not spread. There's no insect that spreads it that we know of. And so this is one that you don't mind having so much, although it looks very similar. If you have this, I've had people from Florida call me and ask me, should I destroy my blueberry plants because I have this virus in them? The answer is no. It can be really severe this year, and it will go away. And so you just have to be aware of what you have, and if you ever have questions about that, make sure you contact your extension agent or somebody to look at this kind of stuff. This is yet another new disease that we've just recently identified. It's been a problem that was reported in North Carolina in 1997, and we've had it since 2008. I did see it in New Jersey last year. And so I suspect, although I see it, I saw one fruit on one plant that I identified as that, yeah. You've seen it, okay. Well, this is one of those things that started out, I'd say in 2008 it was a curiosity. We had one farm that had it. It was more of a curiosity. It has become a major issue for us. So if you see it at all, you need to at least be aware that this can become a major issue. We just named it as a species last year. This is what it does to the berry. It makes it kind of the berry does not mature. It's a green spot, and that spot will never mature. The berry is usually a lot smaller when it has that spot than the other berries. And if you try to eat that, it just tastes terrible because that's still an unripe portion of a berry. So it just doesn't taste good at all. And this is what it looks like on the leaves. It causes a leaf spot. It'll come out ahead of the berry spot, but it doesn't cause enough damage on the leaf to be concerned. But the concern is that you be able to see it. Okay, so it's that kind of white looking leaf spot on the underside, kind of a yellow spot on the top. In the summer, it dries out and it looks like this. So it just looks like any other blueberry leaf spot just about you'll see, but it can make a shot hole. But the bad thing is on the fruit, and we have a hard time getting it out. Now you're going to drop a lot of your berries in the field with it in some varieties, but then a lot of them unfortunately go to the packing line. And it is almost impossible to get this out of the packing line because the little spot will turn down, even if you have the electronic eyes that are looking at color sorters, those kind of things, it'll turn perfectly down every time just about. And so even if you've got humans trying to go through the packing line, all they see is a blueberry and you got that spot going through, and you're still going to have, this is actually from a Kroger, and I've seen it in other places where I actually shop. Where's my arrow at? But you can see that in the clamshell. That was from last year in the clamshell. And of course, as a pathologist, I see that in the supermarket, and I just get all excited. I think that's the greatest thing in the entire world. But nobody else feels that way but me. So that's, and what do you do about it? We thankfully have been able to find some things you can do about it. One of the good things, the good news, if you have a good spray program for mummyberry, you're probably going to control a lot of this, because the DMIs plus Captan in particular are actually very active. We know from some studies that it's generally coming in early. We get early, if we spray early during that bloom phase, we're going to get this. We get a little bit of control in mid-season sprays, but you go in over the full season, we get the exact same thing as we got when we were spraying early just about. And so what it amounts to is the early sprays are very important. So Captan, Endar, and Pristine generally works, although we have found that we have resistance to that fungus, to Pristine. So if we see that fungus now, I tell people not to spray Pristine anymore. I don't trust it when we have that fungus, and that's a bad thing. But this fungus is very, very capable of developing resistance. Here's the really cool thing we found, and I don't know how much y'all spray lime sulfur up here on blueberries, but the lime sulfur in particular has been very effective. A single late application of lime sulfur was as good as the full season application of Captan in this study. And so one application, and lime sulfur actually is organic, so you can use it. So that's one good thing, and so you can add that to the things that work. We actually did a trial in 2014. We looked at lime sulfur, Sulfurex, which is a similar type product, and then we looked at Captan as well as late dormant applications. And you can't really see all that data, but it's a tremendous amount of work we did on that. And the bottom line is that Sulfurex at 2 gallons per acre was as good as lime sulfur at 5. So you can use Sulfurex if you wanted to use that product. And the Captan didn't work well at all, which I didn't expect it would, but some of the producers wanted us to look at that. And this just shows you something you can see to kind of get a feel for what this disease does. This is one trial. Here's your untreated, and you look at the fruit spot incidence. Here we were about 38% of the fruit had those spots on it. The lime sulfur knocked it back down substantially, and the Sulfurex knocked it back down substantially as well. But again, that's one application, so we're not doing everything else we can do to knock it down. So if we've combined that lime sulfur as a late dormant and then use our mummyberry sprays, it should be a lot better. So again, these lime sulfur products work. They're very good. Sulfurex also works as a product, and Captan did not work. So if y'all are seeing that though, I would suggest that y'all be aware that could be a problem. I don't know who your pathologist would be who'd work on that, but something we need to look at. All right, I'm gonna go through some blackberry stuff real quick as well. Blackberry is the second thing you wanted me to cover. Again, if you look at all the different diseases, there's no way I can cover all of these within this time frame. But I'm gonna concentrate mainly on some of the work we're doing in Georgia. One of the things we're looking at is cane blight. This is an important disease. I've heard somebody mention it here. I doubt you have as much of a problem as we do in Georgia with it, but I'm sure you do have it. I was impressed by looking at some of the canes on some of the blackberries here at this research station, how clean they look by comparison to our canes. So I think y'all are doing pretty good. One of the things that I do want to mention is about destroying the old floricanes. Now, I don't know when y'all are doing that. It sounded like y'all are doing that in the fall. And in Georgia, I tell our producers to destroy the old floricanes as soon as harvest is over. We don't wait at all, because the cane blight organism, and we've looked at that, the organism actually goes almost immediately into a full growth phase on those old canes just as soon as harvest is over for us. It may be different for y'all. When you go to the Northwest, they do recommend that you keep those canes in place for a period of time. But if you do that, you might be increasing your disease, so it's something you do need to consider. As far as the pathogen and what it does, it can actually take us out of production in blackberries pretty quick. We've had some cases where we've lost about 90–95% of our blackberries within a year to cane blight, and that's where no fungicides were utilized, but it can be pretty bad. Symptoms are these kind of white looking canes that you see with the pepper spots on them. I won't go through the disease cycle on this, but just to make sure you look at that when you get a chance. But we do have those white pepper spots you would see. That's actually the conidia and the fruiting structures going through. That's what it looks like if you were to bust one of those open. You have all these millions and billions of spores coming out of one of these. And then there's also this ascospore that develops out of this also. So it's an important disease. As far as what works on it, we're trying to do some studies. We've done this for a couple of years now. The thing that seems to work the best so far is rally. And I need to rework some of this data. So just looking at this, it looks like Pristine, Switch, and Thompson don't work at all. That's not exactly the case because there's other ways of measuring this, and I think they are actually reducing the growth of that disease, but I don't have all that data worked out yet. But rally definitely is having an impact. And so I'm advising our producers now, based on studies, to start using rally for cane blight. Here's another study from 2014, a lot of different things, but you can see rally was clearly the winner. That's a DMI type fungicide, but it does actually have pretty good effect on cane blight, which surprised me because it wasn't on our list of materials that I thought would be active. This is, let's see, did I just hit the wrong thing? Okay, one of the bigger things, and we've talked about pinching and tipping these canes. Most people let this get ahead of them. I mean, it's hard. A blackberry grows so doggone fast. And it's hard, especially if it's raining or whatever, to get in and get ahead of it. But if you are going to make big, giant pruning cuts on these above the wire, then what I've told people is it's kind of like, which would you rather have done to you? Would you rather have your little finger cut off or your leg cut off? And you'd probably say, I don't want to have either one, but given the choice, which one do you think you'll recover from better? And so that's why this pinching off is so much better. If you can do that, you can see how much of an injury that is. It's not very much, and hopefully it'll have that same impact versus cutting and making that big open wound, which can be colonized so well by these organisms. Botrytis is another one that comes in that we have to deal with. The same control mechanisms would work as far as fungicides, but it also comes in on these things and can also come in on some other ways as well. But again, it's also producing various types of fruiting structures, and it will splash. It'll go directly from your old canes to your new canes with these spores. And so it's something you've got to be aware of. All right, here's something you don't have, I don't imagine, but this is something that we have to contend with. And it's not, people are not even aware that this is a problem, but this is an algal disease. So it's actually an algae. And so this is something, again, if you were on the coast or anywhere like that, you might possibly see it with higher humidity and temperature. But you can see it is causing a kind of a lesion, and then it cracks open, and other organisms like cane blight get into that. And this is just what it looks like under a scope. It has these algal filaments, similar to a fungus, but it's not a fungus. It's actually an algae. It will sporulate, produces spores. It has these little spore heads that come out. You can see them there. And that produces zoospores. So it's actually somewhat more related to like a phytophthora or something like that, but it's not in that same category, but it's somewhat related. Also gets on blueberries in Florida. And Phil Harmon down there told me last year they actually lost several plantings of blueberries to this algae, which is kind of bizarre. But I don't know if it's getting more aggressive or what's going on with it. But we found that Prophyte, as far as the application method for that, is the only thing that works. And I don't know how much Prophyte y'all utilize, but these phosphonate materials like Prophyte are actually pretty active on quite a few things. We apply Prophyte on blueberries and on blackberries now, and they will control, that particular class of fungicides will control often fungi, so it'll control leaf spots, things like that are on the leaves. It will control root rots. You can apply it to the foliage, it'll actually control phytophthora root rot. And now we find that it actually has good response on this algal disease as well. This is results from 2013. And this is 2014. Again, the Prophyte looked good. I've got the dye thing highlighted there as well. I think it's a little bit of suppression, but it's not registered or legal on either blueberries or blackberries, so it doesn't really make any difference. All right, again, going back to this www.smallfruits.org. If you want to know exactly what to spray and when to spray it, we have these at-a-glance spray guides for both blackberries and blueberries that are in there. And so you can go through and pick out, you can pick and choose the fungicides that are there. Again, always use good resistance management techniques. Very important thing. Make sure you're not using the same fungicide class more than a couple of times in a row, and follow all label directions. All right, so that concludes my presentation.